Hey everybody, Adam Savage here in my cave with a really cool new Star Wars origin story. I first saw Star Wars when I was 10 years old, then I read the magazines about it and learned that people actually built that stuff. And 30 years later, I found the greatest of life's pleasures in actually getting to work on Star Wars. The fan became the creator, and a lot of my colleagues at ILM have that similar experience. And that pleasure has been afforded to two great friends of mine. Sean Charlesworth and Mark Dubeau got to design, build, and animate some new walkers, like the AT-ATs from Empire, for the production of The Mandalorian. I think when you watch the interview, you'll be able to see the pleasure on both of their faces of having been able to contribute to a Star Wars production. Let's get into it. All right, can we start with the walker? This is so beautiful. Talk to me about the process of making this and how it made it into the show.
Okay. Well, right after Phil made a tweet to Jon Favreau about how much he loved the show and the fact that it really felt like we're, kind of seeing something from the past where they were shooting from the hip, we got contacted by Doug Chiang, who said that they had this junkyard sequence that they wanted to do an AT-AT-like walker in.
Amazing.
And so we took a really fast meeting with them. They kind of swung by and they had some ideas about what it could be, like this big junker thing or whatnot. But, at the end of the day, we were left with this impression that what they really, really wanted was if you had taken a probe droid and an AT-AT and mashed them together, you would get this kind of crazy construction. And if you saw them in silhouette against the sky, you would be almost confused as to what it was.
Because I see features of the AT-AT, that sort of semicircle actuator down there, and the legs are very much like that. But I see, your probe droid, those kind of
little grabby
articulated grabby arms.
Yeah.
So is this mostly kitbash, or is this drawn and printed and then assembled?
Well, it's mostly it's actually a partial digital kitbash and a digital model at the same time. Sean and I had been working together on another show that had stuff to do with Mars, so we actually had like a lot of like Martian, tech kitbash kind of stuff. So
little greeblies and things that you could use as decoration and surface detail.
We could both be pointing at different parts of this thing right now, and he, like I know that Sean made this thing because it came from something else.
Right.
And so I just quickly bashed something together using all the parts that we had gotten and digitally. Okay. And then made a presentation of 3 of these guys to Doug.
Three different options.
Doug liked the legs and he liked different parts of it, but he actually selected a bunch of stuff and put it all together. So this is actually like all 3 mashed into one.
So it's an a la carte model.
It's a la carte. And he's the one that actually was like, we want to have a big turret on the top. Because this initially had this big opening in the top and the arm would actually lift stuff up and then it would grind it and stuff would fall out of the bottom.
Oh, that's neat.
But he was like, it's actually better to have a big turret on it. And so Sean and I just kind of got together after he approved that and then just started putting the model together. Okay, we had a very short turnaround.
You have a digital model, and this was animated on set. Very similar to the original walkers, am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
So given that it's animated, did you also have did you have machined armature in there, or you did it with a print?
So first, Mark and I had worked on stuff before, like 3D printing for Tippett stuff. I had never built a puppet. So they
like a stop motion.
No.
Okay.
I mean, I went to film school. I did some animation, so I academically know like how it should probably be like this. But this is like very early in the pandemic.
Okay.
So Gibby was going to Animate, who's done a lot of stop motion stuff here, and I was trying to like, how should I build this? How do you want it? And like, just with the chaos of everybody going remote and everything, like we just were not getting in touch like we needed to. And so a lot of it was kind of guesswork. And I was super thrilled to be working on Star Wars.
Sure.
Like 8-year-old me was very excited, but also I was super stressed out because I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing.
But not only that is Phil stepped in
Yeah.
And very quickly turned around and gave the proclamation that he's like, we don't have the time or budget for an actual armature inside of this thing.
Right.
So it needs to actually stand on its own without putting any metal in the
Oh,
legs.
wow.
So it is completely 3D printed. And we had been using the Formlabs printers for a lot, and they had just come out with some of their engineering resins.
Yeah.
So I picked one that I thought seemed like the good choice, but I had never used it before. And it seemed, because I had a little give to it, it was good. So we got it all together. There are metal rods in the legs.
I was going to say that also. Am I seeing some aftermarket threads?
Yeah.
Also
So there's rods in the legs for stiffness, but these big discs, the big AT-AT disc, the knees, there was no way to get a metal support in there.
Yeah.
And so we built it, and it was the animator's like, this is okay. And
big washers in there.
Yeah,
sure.
Then we had a heat wave, and we came in and all the legs had buckled.
Oh my God. Like between two frames?
Look, I don't think they were in the middle of animating yet.
Okay.
Luckily, it was before that, but they were bad. It was bad.
There was the first time they noticed that something was up is usually when you're animating something, they'll leave the lights on, they'll leave the setup on and everything like that, and then they go to lunch. And then somebody came back from lunch, and we use this thing called Dragon, which allows you to go back and forth
To make sure this frame matches the last, etc.
Yeah, and he's just looking at it like, wait, what is going on? He went from like up here to like down here, you know, and they basically just went.
From the heat wave.
Yes.
Softening up the plastic.
So at that point, you know, he tried to get it back up to where it was, and he kind of got it there. And then the proclamation was, if you start a shot, you gotta finish the shot.
Yeah.
You can't just leave the thing and come back the next day. You can't, even if we turn off the lights, we don't want to take any.
No matter how.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of very, very hungry people on set sometimes.
So it was, there's a big learning curve. Definitely learned a lot about how to properly build the 3D printed stuff. Like the whole platform started to sag. So there's metal rods that we are literally tied in with just wire to keep it from drooping too much. And
wow.
So it held together just long enough to get everything animated.
Yeah.
Well, that's the budget they had, right?
And the other thing too, you were looking in there, that actually lit up.
I was going to say, it's detailed inside there.
Well, it's not really detailed. What I did was I got a piece of cardboard and I found this great picture of a Russian tank crew inside the tank.
That's what I'm looking at?
That's what you're seeing.
Yeah,
it's like, and I kind of scaled it and put it in there and did so. Sean put in these, I think it's purple lights.
Yeah, it's kind of a little purplish LED.
Yeah, there's LEDs that illuminate that inside, and when you get close on it and it's moving, you'd swear there was like a crew inside. Yeah. We never get even remotely close to it.
Amazing. No. And then the whole claw is articulatable?
It articulates, but we made the decision to shoot that separately.
Oh.
Christopher Morley, he was our VFX supervisor on it. He made a decision very early on that I thought was really smart, where it's like anytime we see that thing going down, we need to have a lot of control over it.
Right.
So he built a rig with Ken Rogerson and some of the other people we've got here where you could animate the cable going down and picking up.
And not have to worry about the rest of the animation.
And we had a little TIE fighter, I could maybe show you that later, that we had made, that it grabs and it picks up. And you could take parts off of it so that you could use it in different orientations. So.
You know, the orange is not a common Star Wars color, but this looks like it was a fun paint job.
It was fun to do. I gave like 5 options to Doug, and he chose this one. And one of the things that we did, this was Sean's idea, which was really smart, is this is kind of that Star Wars language, and it's all of our names of the people who worked on it printed all over. This one is Phil. I think.
Nice.
Phil's right up front.
Phil is right there, And I can't remember where mine is, but
It's such a classic model
Yeah,
maker
yeah.
thing. On the tedium of doing a long job, you gotta sign it. And like I've had my name show up in a hero shot and get yelled at by my supervisor because I didn't know anyone would be looking at that
Oh
part.
yeah, but if you look close and you know a lot about Star Wars vehicles, you can actually see this is the tail end of an AT-AT.
Oh, so it is. Look at that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I was wondering because I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm wondering if I could recognize any of these parts as like digitally kitbashed from.
Well, I do a lot of digital modeling, doing replicas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I have like a bunch of kits that I'm kind of, sometimes I'm working on them, sometimes I get them from other people. And so I had an AT-AT that I was kind of working on
Nice.
for a little while because I wanted to get something that was a lot more accurate than what was out there. And
I
it was
love
just
that
like, I just tilted it.
Yeah, I love it. And that's the clevis pin.
Yeah.
I'm assuming for the cylinders that you had little bits of KNS metal or something like that on these little actuators.
Yeah, Sean built
they're
those.
They're just metal tubes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my least. The way they connect is my least favorite part of the model. We put them on in as like an afterthought, and they don't actually really function as pistons.
Yeah,
They,
yeah.
if you see the way they are there, they have like this elbow at the base, and it's just like there's no strength in that whatsoever.
Right. It's a poor
Yeah.
power distribution.
What we were trying to do was just follow that whole like we want it to be confusing, you know.
Now, I love the fact that it's got articulated toes. Did those also move a little bit for the walking?
Yeah. So it's the main base, and then each toe separate, and then the ring's separate. And
Yeah.
there is a certain order of, these are all jigsaw puzzles. There's an order of operation, like
In terms of assembly?
Yeah, and like because I would build things and I'd be like, there's no way I can actually assemble that.
Right.
So I'd have to go back and revise it.
Yeah.
And then there's just giant ABS rods that go through the body that the legs clamp on. So the tops of the legs are actually like a clamp that clamp on that, and you can tighten and loosen for
neat.
different friction.
So I remember when you guys were working on this, you described it in the most oblique, abstract terms. You said, working on something really cool, can't wait for you to see it. And I was watching the episode and I saw this and I was like jumped out of my chair.
Yeah.
What was it like for you guys to see the animation in the episode?
It was a little surreal, because while we were building it, I mean, it was like we were like kids again putting together like, we're doing a Star Wars model kit, kind of thing.
But it's your own Star Wars.
And it was fun to build too, because once we had hammered out the basic design and then started detailing it, we would send pictures to Doug, and it's just like you've got Doug Chang going, keep going. Yeah, keep going. Looks great. Keep going.
Yeah.
Like we literally got like no notes from him after that first approval. And once it got into the shots, we were like, my only sore point would be, I wish they had done a shot where we got really close.
Yeah, they're all kind of in the distance and a little blurry. But they still look great.
So did you make one of these for all that stood in for all of them?
Yeah.
So how many separate animated elements using this did you guys film?
Well, sometimes they would actually have two cameras on the thing at once at different angles. So they would animate it, and it would serve for two shots because we had a very short schedule on it.
Right.
Gibby and his team would probably know best about exactly the way they did that. But yeah, we had to do. It was quite the turnaround. By the time it got into their hands,
it was the most exciting thing and the most stressful thing I've ever done.
Yeah, because when it first got on set too, Phil was the first guy to grab it and set it down and start like moving it.
And I'm just like,
and there's a picture of me and Phil, and that's the first time he's kind of locked it down and he was playing with the joints. And I was like, watch, he'll just be. He was like, well, you got to fix that. And, Phil wants something that's going to be rugged,
He's going to put it through his paces.
Yes. And he was like, okay, it's working. It's good.
Now, you said it was required to be able to stand on its own, but I noticed a stand here with a port. Did you have an external support for much of the animation?
We did. Yeah, since the legs ended up being a little problematic. And so I had provided a mount in the body in case of that. So it was there when we needed it. But I've definitely learned a lot from this first one.
But you know, to be fair, every time we do stop motion animation, we always try to have some sort of amount that even if it's like a bipedal character or whatever it is, it's just we want to make sure that it's always kind of stuck in the right position. So even even for the Bomar Monk and some of the stuff that we're working on right now, we always try to factor in these mount points.
All right. Well, so let's move and pivot. We're going from Mandalorian to Book of Boba Fett.
Yep.
Tell me about this guy. How did this? What was your first intersection with the project? You get some drawings?
Usually it's like through a call. Like they say that they have a sequence, and it would work really well for stop motion.
Yeah.
And somebody said something about a Bomar Monk, and I had no idea what it was. And I think you did, but
I knew what it was.
Brett Foxwell knew what it was.
What is a Bomar Monk?
Oh my God, the Bomar Monk!
The Bomar Monk shows up in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
When C-3PO and R2 come in the giant gate in the palace, you see it for all of 3 seconds as a full scale. Like
in a distance shot.
Yeah, and it's very it was cobbled together. It's barely animated, and you see it for like 4 seconds.
It walks like this.
Yes. Yeah. And it has a brain in a jar here, which was added digitally after on ours. But so it was a very obscure thing, which was very exciting to be able to do this.
Did you have good reference material, or does the original model exist?
There's a digital model that exists of this that was built off of, I think, reference of the initial one.
Okay. So a lot of work had been done for you.
And this model came to us initially from ILM. They had already built a version of it.
All of this detail is ILM.
Okay.
Yeah.
The trick for us was then we had to engineer how the heck to fit an armature in there and make it work and still look like the original.
Well, and I mean, I'm touching these legs. These are all solid metal.
Well, the problem you run into with the 3D printing in resin is when you get something this long and spindly, it warps. Yeah. So I had messed around with, can we put rods in them? And it was, I mean, it's such a tight fit. I was even looking at like carbon fiber rods.
This is like some Jack Skellington armature.
Yeah. So then I suggested we could get these 3D printed in metal. However, the 3D printed metal is not, unless you're going to pay like NASA money, it's not super, super precise. It's kind of rough.
Okay.
So I got samples printed and gave them to Brett, our machinist, and he tried turning them and milling. He's like, we can do this. I can deal with it.
Oh,
yeah.
So it's a
all
combined
of those
3D printing with machining.
Yeah. So this was an interesting process because we had a bigger group this time because we had Mark, me, Brett, and Gibby was animating again. And so the process was, I'd have to figure out where the pivot points would be in an actual puppet. Then I had to give those measurements to Brett. And Brett then started making a center block, and all of these have ball joints on them.
Right.
And then he
sort
would
of manifold.
Yeah, and then he'd give that to me, and then I would digitally replicate what he did and stick it inside the model, and then I had to design all these body panels to attach to it. Yeah. So it's deceptive. It's way more complicated than it actually looks on the outside.
But I mean, but that also is calling back to the beginning of special effects, where there was always this tension and collaboration between the machining department for the insides of puppets and the practical outsides, the stretched skins and all of that.
Yep. So basically, Brett designed a core that's in this that is a steel block. There's little ball joints on each thing, and then he even did the butt. That's on a swivel, and then the arm is on another one down here.
Yeah.
The strength of that swivel is really
So the 3D printed metal legs, the rest is I printed on my Formlabs at home out of better material than we used on the walker, and everything really held up well. And then there's little magnetic pieces like this that you had to remove so that Gibby, he had a flying rig that this was suspended on.
Oh.
And then
that gave him access to
it gave him access. And then Brett put these little tiny eyelets in the tips of the legs so that you could tie down the legs to the terrain.
So you could drill a hole in the terrain and wire it through.
Yeah.
And you had to do that every time a foot hit the ground so that it wouldn't move.
Yeah.
The train itself was a feat.
Yeah.
I mean, like building this thing was like, it was like 2/3 of the job. The other third was we had a 20-foot long run it had to go on that had to, like, the ground you see him on is not digital whatsoever. It's all practical. And it needed to look like sand, but couldn't get disturbed or whatnot. And it was like a 20-foot long piece of sandpaper. Like, it was not fun. If you tripped and fell on that thing, it was very,
Really
very
hard.
uncomfortable.
But
Go ahead.
I had to point out the thing that I'm most proud of that you never, ever, ever see.
Show.
But the original Monk has these pistons, right? And there's no way that these can physically, like, actually work on a real mechanical thing, but they had to be there and they had to look real. This took me the longest out of any engineering thing. This is actually surgical tubing. The piston itself is elastic cord that is knotted, tied through here, runs the whole way through.
No way.
And so so if you do it too far, you can see it does bend like rubber, but it gave the illusion of pistons working when it's actually not doing anything at all.
Sean, you are a
And
genius.
you don't see it at all.
That's amazing.
But you know it's there.
I'm so proud of it.
There was a lot of weird things that we had to do for this guy. Like the finish, initially Doug wanted it like black, but when we had it on set, it was just looking like a shadow. So I gradually had to make it more and more look like cast iron with like a rusty paint job. But doing the butt end of this thing was really interesting because we just got like a piece of geo for it and some key art as to what it's supposed
I'm curious
to look
about
like.
the texture here. It's really lovely.
It's actually it's kind of like a two-part thing. I digitally modeled a grain on the model itself, which looks a bit like a carbon fiber. And then we had different kind of gauges of that we sent to Doug, and he chose one. But when we were painting it, we wanted it to kind of feel like dusty and a little bit like, almost feel like cloth. So what I did was I ran out and I got about like 9-10 pairs of different types of black nylons. Oh! And then small nylons, and then stretched it over.
That's, I can see back here where they gather.
Yeah, they gather in the back and they gather over here until it was like fine enough that it had that great kind of like, they call it, like a facing ratio, like the way the light fell on it. Because we didn't want this to read as metallic or anything like that. And it always looked like a dusty bag on the original one. And so, it was basically like it's women's nylons over the top of this thing. And then Sean laser cut these little triangles.
The triangles are a fabulous detail.
Yeah, they're like that. They were like that on the reference they gave us. So we did that anyways and kind of glued them on.
What I love that both of these models really exemplify, because I get this question a lot, is how is 3D printing changing the film industry? And this is the answer, is it's just one more tool in the arsenal, because you're still using all the oldest tools in the arsenal as well as the most modern tools.
This was a good blend, I think, of the two. And there's definitely times I'm like, I am a 3D printing guy. It's like, we should not 3D print this.
There's parts on here where, we went and made molds and cast it out of different materials.
Right.
The piping and the wiring, like old techniques to kind of like, if you flip it over, it's got fun details and stuff like that. And we had to go and put like a little marker on here because there's supposed to be a jar in front with a brain in it sloshing around.
So that little two-sided ball, that's to help the animators motion track to the model itself.
So whenever you see that brain ball in the front and the water's sloshing around, I mean, that would have been very difficult for us to do stop motion.
Sure. No, I've animated beer before. It's no fun.
So it was a fun project. We had plenty of time. We had a great crew. We had a good time.
I love the metal 3D printing and the idea of using it as a hybrid with post-machining process, even down to probably the slitting to get the right amount of tension on these joints is just gorgeous.
No, and it actually had a texture to it, I think, that lended itself really well to the lighting in there. It just allowed the light to kind of ripple across the surface a little bit more instead of just being this polished, greasy, shiny look,
So you guys must have both been convening a little bit with the 10-year-old versions of yourselves.
Man, I went to film school and then did nothing with it, and I got my first screen credit at age 40 whatever, and I never thought I'd get to work on Star Wars, so I was very honored.
Yeah, I mean,
Guys, it's just really magnificent work, and like I'm so glad you're such fans, and you both get to enjoy that from the fan standpoint and the professional standpoint. It's well deserved, guys.
yeah, it's one of those things that's really fun because I know there's a lot of people out there right now working on the digital side of those shows, but they don't have anything physical that they've worked on, like sitting in front of them.
Right.
We get to work on this stuff, and then we pass it in the hallway every day, and we're like, we made that.
It's amazing.